This is Views in Paradox Classics.
Welcome, any and all, to Views in Paradox Classics Edition. This is a special limited series where three humble filmmakers attempt to go over some seminal classics and fill in the gaps in our education by watching some movies we probably should have seen already. Up first is, or second rather, last week we did Nosferatu, and this week we are talking Fritz Lang's Metropolis, which aired in 1927. Let me start by introducing myself. I am John Olson, also known as John in Paradox, and joining me for the entire duration of this series, we have Daniel Gibson. Welcome.
Hello.
And Jose Benutula.
Yo.
All right, so last week we watched Nosferatu, and you know, this is our only other silent film in the set that we have going. So I kind of want to see how you guys, just like your initial impressions, how it compared to that viewing. Danielle, you want to kind of kick us off with some thoughts?
Sure. Wow. This film, I had to repeatedly remind myself when it was made because I didn't really believe it. It really completely blows Nosferatu out of the water. It was, I think, 5 years older?
Yeah, 5 years later.
Younger?
So Nosferatu would have been filmed in 21, and this was filmed mostly in 26.
Yeah. No, this is fantastically crafted, inspiring. I want to learn more about how it was made. I'm still processing the story. There's a lot to unpack here. Very fascinating though. I'm excited to see what you guys think. This was, I don't think you can compare these two films really fairly. I don't think you can compare Metropolis to most films fairly.
That's true. It's a pretty high bar. Jose, what are some of your initial thoughts?
I mean, I'm gonna trail Danielle and saying wow because it's an epic film. It's from the moment it starts, you see this is epic. Like the scenography, like the artistry that goes on this film, it's phenomenal. I mean, it's things that you try to do today and it will cost too much money or it will be too much of a trouble, and then you end up doing it in a computer or something like that. But I was blown away by how this film, like the magnificence of this film.
Yeah. And talking about cost, we were before the show started, we were talking a little bit about the cost of this show or movie adjusted for inflation. And what did we come up with, Daniel? Because you had looked up those numbers.
Yes, it would have been about $200 million to today's money.
Yeah,
in dollars.
So it bankrupted the studio. They, even to finish production, they were forced to borrow $4 million from MGM. And I've kind of found some conflicting information on the second studio, but I believe Paramount, or there was another one called Film Friends, but they had to borrow from American studios just to finish out the production. And then the film, because it was 2.5 hours, it couldn't recoup money fast enough. They couldn't put it in enough screenings to really recoup their money back at a good rate. And which is still a problem we see today, right? Where we get these 2.5, 3 hour films, and it's how many showings can you really put in a theater? So they wound up restructuring the board of the company. I think it's UFA. They restructured the board with a much more conservative board of directors who then pulled the film from production because of its Marxist themes, because they didn't like the themes of the film. And so it just had no shot of kind of ever recouping its money back. Well,
can I point out, I imagined it's probably a little bit longer than 2.5 hours because it's missing a good bit of it still, because it said that there were moments where they would put text on what they thought was missing because it was just completely torn apart after.
So the film was mostly lost the original prints in Germany, and what for the better part of a century, all we had was foreign re-edits of the film. So they had edited it down to be much shorter so that they could sell it in foreign markets, and that was like all we had. And the footage is very good. And then in 2008, they found a 16 millimeter backup copy in a museum in Buenos Aires that had just been sitting there for the better part of 75 years.
This is why we make backups.
Right?
Okay.
And so they cut it together. And in the version that we all watched, which was the free version on YouTube, I'll just throw that out there. You can all watch it for free on YouTube. It does have ads, but they're pretty bearable. So in this version, you can easily tell the difference between the original footage and the 16 millimeter. Right?
Yeah.
And this made me think of Nosferatu, because Nosferatu was entirely a backup copy like this. So that accounts for a lot of the degradation of the footage in the low quality in Nosferatu compared to a lot of this film. Right? You can kind of see how that happened. Because we go from 35 millimeter, 16 millimeter, and it's like scraped all to hell. So you can really tell. And then there's at least one key scene that I noticed that's cut from the film, and it's the fight between the Mr. Business and the mad scientist. We'll do a quick recap in just a moment.
Yeah.
But so yeah, I think it was probably closer to 245. Right? That's like at a guess ballpark.
At least, yeah.
Yeah. And like, because some of the scenes, it's just like a couple shots were missing here and there that were trimmed down. And like some of them I could actually see were like easy cuts to make, because it was essentially like the same action being reiterated. But some of them, the cuts were kind of baffling in terms of like, I wondered how people could even follow the film given what was missing. I mean, did you guys have any kind of thoughts like that? I feel like we're really lucky to have seen this kind of restored version.
Yeah. I felt like every moment, every beat was drawn out. Not overly drawn out, but drawn out so much that I assumed that whatever was cut out was already a big chunk. So, I mean, it was like they would like sum up whatever was missing in a sentence, and I was just like, that's probably like 10 minutes right there.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I was just overly... because they were just so detailed with everything.
Yeah. It's true. And I made a note at one point during the film where I'm like, almost every action is repeated 2 to 3 times. Like a physical action that somebody has. Like they do everything 2 to 3 times as though the audience needs it repeated 3 times in order to understand what's happening. When I kind of felt like, I get it on the first one, and now you're showing it to me several more times. But maybe it was trust an audience. It's sort of that element, like you're the early
we
film.
Also like we've probably grown up knowing how to consume media. I feel like not everybody sees media when they wake up and flip on the TV in 1927.
Right. Right.
So to give a quick recap of the plot of the film. For anybody who hasn't watched it and is just kind of curious about our thoughts on a peripheral level, which is fine. We are going to talk in spoilers, but I feel like the statute of limitations is well up by now. So in brief, there is a society where there are workers who live below, and there are a privileged 10,000 the upper crust who live above and live a glorious life. There's a businessman named Joe Fredersen, who is the sole ruler of Metropolis, this great machine-powered city, and his son, who's known as Frederer, has kind of a moral awakening when a woman named Maria confronts him with children from the below city, and then he follows her to the below, and he sees the plight of the worker. And this creates kind of a divide between father and son. The father goes to a mad scientist named, let me get this right.
Yeah, it's
where are you?
Rodwan.
Rotwang. He goes to a mad scientist
Rotwang.
named Rotwang who has created a automaton that can mimic humanity, and the Feddersen winds up using that automaton to create a fake version of Maria, who is a symbol of hope for the people, to sow discord. And then there is a clash between high and low society. And Rotswang is kind of overtly evil in between all this. Like, Fredderson is evil, and he's, callous and controlling, but Rotswang is just like, he's like the Joker. He just wants to sow chaos for everybody. And so he secretly programs the automaton to sow discord both above and below. That's kind of, I would say, the gist of it. And we'll talk details.
Chaotic evil.
Yeah, if you want to know more, watch the film. It's really good. I was blown away, like you guys, kind of to give my initial thoughts. The technical prowess on display is incredible. If you know anything about cinematography and about sort of measuring light and having to balance these things, the fact that the film looks so good, given the kind of technology and the kind of film stock they had available, is mind-boggling. I feel like the cinematographers had to be mathematicians to get this right, because they did things where they would run the film back and forth up to 30 times to get multiple exposures. So that means you have to calculate the difference so that you're not overexposing the crap out of your film, just getting white imagery. And the fact that it looks so good throughout the whole film, and that they can contrast sort of light and dark so well within a single frame, really blew me away. I was just on a straight technical achievement level, I felt like this film was fairly glorious. So let's talk theme and or just what impressed you guys the most. Was it kind of production value? Is it story more that you want to impress, or should we go behind the scenes?
Well, I mean, I want to say something about training on what you said.
Sure.
I think from my perspective, from an editing point of view, this film is fantastic. It's considering the things that you're saying, like right now you just jump into an editing program, everything is digital. You want to cross dissolve two images, you want to superimpose two images, and it's fairly easy. Now you have these collages of eyes looking at her, kaleidoscope images, and you go you did not have a computer to do this. You did this by hand or in camera. And then I go that requires a level I wouldn't even know how to do them if somebody gives me a camera and goes you can use a computer to do these. And then those collages were perfectly placed, perfectly done, to the point that you don't see mistakes on the mixing. And I found that I was blown away by that. I mean, the level, the kind of cutting, the juxtaposition that they were doing. I mean, clearly, in a difference with Nosferatu, this is closer to modern narrative than to the way that I feel.
Yeah.
Right.
And while we're kind of on the effects, so everything is done in camera, which is really mind-boggling. And they invented in quotes a method of superimposing people onto sets, which was really kind of, I think it was done before this film, but it was perfected on this film, and the effects artist has the credit for it. It's in my notes, so I have too many notes, so now I can't find stuff. But the effect basically says that we're gonna shoot the set, and we're going to put a window at 45-degree angle, and part of that window is going to be painted with mirror, so that we can literally record action happening at a 45-degree angle, and we can place it onto the frame. So they were able to add some of it they did stop motion, the cars and stuff they did stop motion, but where they have people on the sets, they had to use this mirror technique, and it's very easy to mess it up, and it's very you have to be technically very careful, because you're using just this practical mirror effect, which is really kind of bonkers when you think about it.
It is
crazy. I want to see some sort of like channel that redoes that, like that actually like recreates whatever practical effects that you'd have to do before digital. Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
Sorry.
and
Maybe
apparently there are
my
some later
age.
films that have done this. On the Wikipedia page, it referenced that Return of the King used this technique for some of the shots, and I was kind of like, why? Like I want to know why. Like, so, but it's like finding out that you'd have to find some kind of documentary. And do the
I feel like they
that
were
way.
like really super into practical effects for like all of the Lord of the Rings.
At least for
the
the
whole
initial
forced
block of shooting. For the initial block of shooting on Lord of the Rings, like that first 2 years, they were really big on practical. And then for the reshoots that came later, they went really heavy on digital. That's why the third movie has so much digital in it, because it's faster.
I would have gotten tired of it too. No, I'm kidding. I love practical effects.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But they are more work.
I get it.
And they are more difficult to pull off. And they just take more time. And like the fact that you have a film like this that they have so many practical effects happening. It's so insane. The film took a staggering 310 shooting days to finish. To put that in perspective, like the longest film productions nowadays are 100 days. And that's like staggeringly long production. Most films try to aim for about 30 production days, ballpark, right? 30 to 60 production days is like a big budget studio film. It just costs so much. And on top of that, the film employed a also staggering 37,000 extras. So on IMDb, where they wrote it, they had like a breakdown. I don't know how accurate it is, but the breakdown goes as such: 25,000 men, 11,000 women, 1,100 bald men, which is actually just extras willing to shave their heads, 750 children, 100, quote, dark-skinned people, and 25 Asians. So, yeah, a lot of white dudes in this film, like a lot, and part of it feels like sometimes it feels like a criticism, because like all of the upper crust are like white males, right? And even the women we see are all in these very like subservient. It's so incredibly patriarchal. It's one of my first notes.
It's so patriarchal.
Written by a woman. So just to kind of go over some credits, I know I'm backtracking a little, but directed by Fritz Lang, written by Thea von Harbo, and based on a book by Thea von Harbo, and the screenplay was written by both Fritz Lang and Thea von Harbo. They were married at the time, and apparently Fritz Lang had an idea for this film and asked his wife to write a book. They wrote the book specifically to be published into, or specifically to be turned into a film. So good marketing on their hand. And then they also released, in the lead up to the film, they released the book in a serialized format in a famous German magazine. So they were like they were really smart in terms of marketing. But it was written by, the book is credited solely to Thea von Harbo. So I think that that makes me think that sort of the patriarchal aspect is very intentional and meant as a criticism as opposed to like a normalization, right?
Like a zeitgeist, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So there's some really interesting stuff going on in this film, and just kind of the staggering scope of it.
Although I mean, my mind went there when I saw the credits, and I go like, oh, this was written like a screenplay and novel by a woman, but that doesn't mean that her intention was specifically to attack it. Like a frame of mind is genderless. Yeah. Like she could be like
Though it feels that way
pushing
when you look
forward
at like
that.
the dancing scene, right? Where
Yeah.
fake Maria is dancing, and we get these shots of the male gaze, and they are like just leering, and then it devolves into just eyeballs, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
think that they were kind of unified on that messaging, right? That like it's gross, because that's the feeling the film gave me, was that this is what the upper crust does, but that it's wrong, right? Like even from the get go, where where they're
Debauchery.
like painting the women for Federer, who's like, you know, the de facto prince of Metropolis. They're like preparing girls for him to chase around the idyllic garden.
Yeah.
Uh,
You know,
yeah,
that when that whole okay, yeah.
I want to
When I
hear it.
first when they
Yes.
first said like, "Oh, well, who's going to be the one to entertain him?" I was like immediately like, "Oh my god, like are these like prostitutes or like are they just like?" But then it was like in a sense there was a little bit of, I don't want to say innocence, but like I didn't think it was going to be as literal as it was. He literally was just like playing, like chasing them
Well,
around, but then it was also like
he is about to
weird.
make out with the
Oh,
one
I missed
when
that.
Maria comes in with the kids, right? He gets interrupted. And it seems
Oh, I
like
missed
Federer has
that
lived
as well.
such a sheltered existence that like
Hmm.
this is just the world to him. This is what his father has presented
Women
to
are
him.
my
Yeah.
toys.
He doesn't
Like,
like he
yeah,
literally doesn't know any different is kind of the feeling we get.
yeah. And I don't know. It was just like such a mixed bag of like, because they present it like, first of all, you see him and the way he's dressed, the way he acts very, to me, I almost questioned whether or not he was supposed to be younger than his actor's age because he just dressed like a young, innocent boy, but like also he was very like, oh, the world is at my disposal. And it was a weird mix of the two, but it was just not, I don't know. It made me feel weird. I was a little put off.
I think it's
Very put
supposed
off.
I mean,
to.
it is.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
to his character's credit,
Yeah.
he has a moral awakening like boom.
Yeah.
It's just like
Immediately.
it's
Immediately.
immediate. Like it's
Yeah.
kind of a two-step process. Like one, he sees Maria and like he's just like, oh, he's like immediately love at first sight with her. But then
Yeah.
when he chases after her, he runs into the factory and he just sees a machine of death, right? Like he literally
Yeah.
sees that we get this visual metaphor that is unlike anything modern films do, where it literally just like morphs what he's looking at into this like monster machine that it's almost like Aztec in that they're sacrificing people.
No, it's Moloch. He says it like it appears on the screen. He looks at it and then suddenly the screen just the words Moloch comes here. And if you Google Moloch, it's the biblical name of Canaanite god associated with child sacrifice through fire and war. Moloch is the result of a boy. It means king, but it evolved as Moloch because the word for king was milk. And it resembles the way that the Aztecs used to sacrifice people, like
Yeah.
taking them up
Yeah, that's
to
what
the
I meant. The
stairs, and then
visual looks like a
it's
temple, right? It looks like
well, he makes
a
it, but
pyramid kind of.
the movie makes a direct reference to this deity, to this
Yeah.
I don't know, the Babylonian or something
Yeah.
deity called Moloch, and then he calls it by name, and then like I found like the transition between the machine and the face of Moloch was very well. Like that's when I started noticing the editing was like really really on point.
Yeah.
Hmm.
There's a lot of biblical reference in this movie, right?
It
Yes.
had yes. It had finally like something that we didn't see in Nosferatu that we commented. There was no religious iconography except for one scene, but it didn't mean a lot. But here there was a lot of religion iconography mixed with it.
Yeah, and it's all like from Revelations. Do you have a thought on that, Daniel?
I felt like, yeah, I mean, okay, I felt like there was narratively a little bit more religious, like references that kind of became very mixed for me, because like, you know, you see the father is the one who owns everything, and then it's the son who goes to go save everyone, but then he falls in love with someone named Maria, who is also mimicked by something that was used to mimic his mom. And every time like there's some sort of comparison between the protagonist's like love interest and their mom, I'm just like, Jesus freaking Christ, your partner's not supposed to be your mother. But like, it's just, it makes me so mad. But there was a mixed bag there. I don't know if that was like purposeful. The whole thing with the mom, this might be a little bit of a derail, with the mad scientist. I cannot remember his name again.
Rotswing.
Rotswing.
I just call him he's an evil Beethoven. Yeah. That's what he looks like.
my brain is always like, oh, the chaotic evil guy, because he's just immediately. That reminded me of do you guys know the Tale of the Corpse's Bride, like the original?
Yeah. I know.
Yeah.
I'm with Jose. I just know the Burton one.
Like the original, long story short, is this guy who was obsessed with this woman who he wanted to save from, she had tuberculosis, she was going to die, like anyway, she was like, who are you, dude? And he was like, oh no, I love you. And then she died, and he like basically preserved her body with like just whatever he could, and replaced her skin with like paper, and like just made her into this doll. Just so that he could like dance around with her and like sleep in the same bed with her and give her her own privacy curtain, and like, you know, basically I guess in this film it was like a robot, but he had control over the robot.
Right. Yeah, he has. And there's some interesting background on the wife / Fredder's mother. So he has this giant effigy, and her name is Hel, and it is a direct reference to the goddess Hel in Norse mythology, who is the goddess of death. And it's actually where the biblical word hell comes from. It actually comes from the Nordic goddess who ruled the land of hell, right? It was like her domain. So kind of like Hades was named after Hades, Hell was named after Hell. So he like literally worships death itself, right? And then this is something that Fritz Lang talked about later, in that kind of as an explanation for his motives, right? Is that he is, you know, we relate it to a dead wife, but it's like he worships this thing, and it's like and it is the personification of death itself. And he uses, you know, the automaton is supposed to be a replacement for Hell, like you mentioned. And what does he use her for? He uses her for destruction and death, like nothing but to cause chaos.
And it's so interesting because she was married to Frieder's dad. I'm so bad at names. It's not.
Or it's his daughter. Sorry, it's Rotswing's daughter who is married to Fredersen, and she dies in childbirth. The movie tells us.
Correct. Right. And so there's already this conflict between the two of them, even though they're like partnering up to like figure out what's happening in the catacombs of the city. It's really interesting. I feel like I had more of a point to that, but I blanked.
It happens. It happens to me all the time.
I want to mention a couple of things that I have. I mean, I'm reading my notes here, and then, you know, because we have seen this movie after we've seen modern films, then then you find yourself saying like, oh, this is like what they did in The Matrix, but you know, it's kind of like the opposite around. So I kind of wonder like if this, because the moment that they start going down on the elevators, I got this is Zion. This is like freaking Zion and The Matrix, where they have all the machinery underground, and then it supports a part on top. Like, I don't know if purposefully
I think
one will be pulled from the other.
The Wachowskis are big on film reference. Like, so many shots in The Matrix, they've directly in the years since attributed to like this or that. So I really wouldn't be surprised, because they're just like, they are like film historians, and they love to pepper their works with references. Danielle?
So like the images of I think it like starts off in the beginning, of the images of all those people just being packed into elevators and like being brought down. The only thing,
so powerful.
It just reminded me of internment camps. That was the first thing I thought of.
Sure.
But
this is
the only thing
before
that
the
gave
Holocaust.
me hope. Yeah. The only thing that gave me solace, I guess, to know it wasn't that malicious. I mean, it's pretty bad, but was that people were coming back. So it wasn't like they were being sent to their deaths, but also they
But
were
the
being
work
sent into
is
basically
supposed to
slavery.
be like a prison, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But
like, I was wondering where they were going when they were coming back. I don't know if they,
because they have the 10-hour shifts, we find out, and it's just they go there, they're basically like slaves, and they come back from their shift and they're all downtrodden when they return.
So I always assumed that even where they lived was just down in the elevator. But
well, they show us the area that floods, where all the children, where they have to like rescue all the children. That's where they live. So they're in like tenement buildings, right?
Yeah, and it's underground,
and it's literally underground. So the workers do live underground, but then they work even farther underground.
Got it.
But like when you think about it, because that beginning, I mean, most of my notes are the first half an hour. Then after that, then you go into the plot and all stuff. But because most of this reference, I think that they do a great job establishing that universe as fast as they can, and then you move forward. You automatically empathize. You understand who the antagonists are. You understand the power struggle between classes. Like it's very on point. Now, it does have a resemblance of death camp, of concentration camps, and then the demeanor, the physical appearance of these people. It's just like Holocaust survivors. The only difference is that this hasn't happened yet. So it cannot be a reference to that, because this is going to happen 20 years apart from that. What it did reminded me, he was just about to rise to power. He was in jail. He was in jail at that point, I think, because he did the push in 1922. And it's not like
atrocities hadn't happened elsewhere in the world, right? Like we think of the Holocaust as such a sentiment.
But think about this. Like think about, and I promise that this is going to be fast. Think about this. Think about the fact that this cannot be a reflection of events on the future. It's a reflection of the zeitgeist of that moment, where Germany felt that it was overworked, underpaid, where it had like all this macro inflation. And then when you compare those shots, for some reason,
this is when Karl Marx was around, starting those kinds of philosophies and ideas about workers' revolutions.
But think about this. The two things that came to mind when I saw that image was 1984 and THX 1183. Like it's directly, I don't know, like I feel that these two movies in the future pull from something like this.
For sure. Yeah, I agree. I wanted to kind of touch back on your statement that Hitler liked this movie. So Fritz Lang was Jewish, and he was sort of distraught at how much Hitler and Joseph Goebbels loved it. There's this kind of amazing factoid that I found, that he met with Goebbels, and Goebbels offered to make him an honorary Aryan and said to him, Mr. Lang, we decide who is Jewish and who is not. And,
oh my God.
And the next day, Fritz Lang moved to Paris. He fled Germany.
Yeah.
So, like, yeah, just like when you hear shit about the Nazis and just like the way that they operate and think, it is terrifying. It is like,
look, I mean, I like that you mentioned this. I had no idea about that, because there's so many references that could be like, look, we are influenced by the things that we watch, and eventually we start thinking that something was our idea, but then because we cannot trace where we got parts of it, when they show the upper, like when they're showing you the down parts, and then they go to like the Garden of the Sons, like they call it like something about like the Sons,
the Club of the Sons,
or something like that. Yeah. The Club of the Sons. So if you look at it, there are representations of Greek statues the exact same way that the Nazis used to represent it. Like the fact that they are doing the track and field, it feels very 1936 Olympics. And then the dome that is next to that shot, it's almost exactly as the dome that Hitler wanted to build after the war, the Volksdome, the People's Hall.
This film
he wanted
turned
to
into a major, like they took this film and turned it into a major propaganda piece. But that was not Fritz Lang's wish with this film. Like, talk about unintended consequences.
Right. Right. Inspiring the devil to build things.
Yeah, it's really wild when you think about just the history. Another thing I thought was fun is that this film takes place in 2026. We're like almost there.
No, that's
Yeah.
amazing.
They said it just 100 years in the future from when they were making it, essentially. And it's like, yeah, why does it have to be so poignant? Yeah.
Yeah.
you know, Mr.
Well,
Business
so-
runs the world, right? It's like, yeah, go ahead, Daniel. Sorry.
So, no, you're good. I was gonna say before, one maybe possibly good thing that it influenced that is very accurate to how we communicate now is, it's a sci-fi film, and sci-fi often it like influences technology. You kind of see video chat in it a little bit,
You
Yeah.
do see a video call. It's crazy.
Yeah. So
You see a video
I was
call.
like, oh, this was this. I'm guessing this would be the first reference to that you would see it, but.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Because the idea of a live feed
In film.
camera was not invented yet.
Yeah.
So like it really is like looking ahead when it does that, because it in the shot, like it's a video call, but it looks like Fredersen can see the worker, but the worker can't see Fredersen. So there's a camera there looking at him.
Yeah.
But there was no live feed. Like that wouldn't be invented for quite some time. Right? Like it wouldn't be invented until like the 50s. So
50s, that's correct.
way ahead of its time in that regard. It's really incredible.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, it was invented around the 1930s because they did broadcast the Nazis did send a signal into space with the 1936 Olympics. That's the whole point of Contact, of the movie Contact. So it was close to be something about a broadcasting. But the thing that gets me about all movies that depict the future, movies that are before the 1940s, is that the future is always depicted analog, because the digital era it's like these people could not conceive a computer. When if you have a representation of anything about the future right now, it's heavily computer organized or run.
Yeah.
Like this was completely analog. You still need the human to operate the machine.
The first computer was yet to be invented because that's a World War II byproduct, right? So of course they couldn't kind of think that, but there is a lot of electrical things happening. The fact that they need humans as switchers is, I think more a narrative thing than like a practical. But you're right, like gears, steam, clocks,
electricity.
These are the things that represent technology, and also the electric light, like the light bulb. So I'd say light bulbs, gears, and steam are like the real imagery we see throughout that represents, evolving technology. But there's so many shots, especially early in, of like piston style gears and just like fast moving large machines, because that was, we're this is the industrial age, and like that is kind of where they felt like everything was going. It was just more of that, right? They couldn't yet kind of picture how like diverse technology would grow, and the idea of technology that is highly advanced without moving parts was definitely not something they were thinking about, right? Because we just use the flow of electricity to do an incredible amount of things now, but it's largely without moving parts. It's just with electrical current and like resistors, which is always kind of hard to wrap your head around when you really think about like, how the hell does my phone work?
Don't ask me.
It's mind-boggling, and it would have been even more mind-boggling from the mid 1920s.
Yeah. Can I say this kind of takes it on a different to a different topic, but just in that one scene where we see the machine the first time and we see the workers work like moving so rhythmically. This film is so I appreciated it so much how carefully crafted the blocking was on top of the production design. It was so highly stylized, especially for its time.
Yeah, they move in time, and also the music fits the scenes. This is a big change from Nosferatu, where like Danielle, you had kind of liked the music, but it was like fairly one note throughout the whole film. Whereas this,
I liked it in an ironic sense.
Yeah,
like I was like, oh yeah.
And the mood of the one piece is pretty good for a lot of that film. But this one is clearly like the music was written for the film. They released albums like that are very specific music. So even though it was all separate, and apparently the composer even played pieces of the music for certain scenes on set so that the actors could hear it. So I feel like during those like dancing scenes and like the big kind of numbers where there's a lot of movement going on, I'm sure that like the composer's there. And like even the ones you're saying where they're like moving back and forth in time, you know, all the workers are kind of moving in step. They probably had somebody there like counting the beat.
Right.
So music, the music is such a like an integral part of this film, and like really, I was constantly kind of impressed by how well it matches, and particularly with the blocking, like you mentioned.
Right.
It feels like musical theater. It feels like it was like a musical theater piece, and then they had certain beat, and then they were doing like working. It just like it was impressive for the times. I noticed it. And I was like, oh wow, like this is. And I wonder, like did they play the music on set, or did they have somebody like point the beat for these people to do everything? Like it's to make a man a machine. That's fantastic.
Yeah. And it comes across so clearly. Like the visual metaphors are very easy to grasp. Like throughout the film, for the most part, it's just like I didn't like when I was kind of like watching the film and doing like this sort of self summary of the film. It was almost like too easy. I was like, I don't really have to break down what's happening. It's very easy to tell what he's going for, like at all times. I think this might be a good segue to talk about some of the behind the scenes aspects. So Fritz Lang was a pioneer in a lot of respects, and maybe one that was, and you know, I don't know what the directors of the theater in this time were like, but he was very much that dictator of a director. So, you know, in the style that would follow, you know, the Kubricks and the David Finchers and the Alfred Hitchcocks of the world. He was definitely of that ilk. You know, he would do take after take after take. And just like, I mean, there's a reason there's 310 days of production. It's because he constantly reshot things and kind of put his actors through hell. They talk about stuff I read, research I read online talks about the flooding scenes and how it was really like damaging to people's health because the water was kept cold. And I think the reason the water is kept cold is so that the water doesn't become germ filled. Because if you shoot in warm water, everybody's going to get really sick. Like you're all going to get pink eye and you're going to get infections, and like warm water is really dangerous to kind of spend a lot of time in if it's not, you know, like close to boiling. like a hot water is one thing, but like warm water is super dangerous. So they kind of, I feel like by necessity they had to keep it colder, but that created problems in itself because of how extended the shooting was. That people were spending just like inordinate amount of time in this water.
I also like it took me a second to like separate myself from where we are now with like COVID and not being in large groups of people. I was wondering if people stayed healthy as they filmed this, because it's just like hordes of people crammed together, like in many of the scenes.
I don't think health is a big concern. Germany was in the middle of like a really bad depression, you know, so when they say they had 37,000 extras, it's like these people wanted any work that they could get, you know. I'm sure it was super easy to find them. It was very easy to find. People were malnourished. But there are other stories of health hazards on this shoot. So they found about 1,100 extras that were willing to shave their heads for the Babel scenes, like the flashbacks of the Tower of Babel. And they shot out in the sun for extended periods, and a lot of them suffered burns, and like they were literally hauling prop rocks and actual logs, like in the hot sun. Like he kind of put his cast through what you're seeing on film. It's kind of terrible. Like, as much as I feel for him kind of being Jewish in Germany at this time, he was also playing dictator on set in a big way where like you will build my vision. There is kind of like this meta version of what you're seeing on screen happening in reality, where like they talk about the thinkers who have the workers do all the work for them, and like the literal production of the film matches that. Like, Fritz Lang was clearly bourgeois. Like he was, you just look up some pictures of him. He was clearly well-to-do, and like was able to kind of get the equivalent of hundreds of millions of dollars to make this film. So there is kind of a hypocrisy on display, I feel like, when watching this film.
Didn't he also like force his actors to do the stunts of when those machines started to blow up and they were like flying through the air?
Yeah, so he didn't want to use dummies because like he was recommended to use dummies for the explosion scenes, and he didn't want to do it because he felt like it would look too fake. So he hooked up extras to harnesses and had them like swing. And he wanted them to really act like they were in pain, which was apparently very easy because they were all actually in pain. And
so messed up.
The main actress who plays Maria, let me find her name here. Bridget Helm. Or Brigitte
great.
Helm. Yeah, amazing. And I do want to talk about her performance because for me, it was the best part of the movie, was just watching her performance. But she was very candid in later interviews about kind of the hell she went through. So there's a stunt where she swings from a bell. And she did this stunt herself. They put some like mattresses underneath, but it was a 25-foot drop. And apparently she got it on the first take, but she slammed against the wall in the take and hurt herself. And apparently she fled the set in tears. The scene where fake Maria gets burned at the stake, spoiler alert, fake Maria gets burned at the stake in a very dramatic fashion. The sort of head worker drags her by the hair, and apparently they did this a bunch of times. She really got like dragged by the hair. She passed and during one of the takes, her dress caught on fire because they used real fire.
What?
Yeah, and in another take, she passed out while she was tied to the stake because what they were using to tie her to the stake was too tight, and it restricted her breathing to the point that she like passed out.
So
like she could have died. Like she literally was like throwing her body at this film in a way that's just kind of like mind-boggling in its lack of safety or like care for her well-being. All that being said, I would like to laud Bridget Helm's performance because it's fantastic. The difference between good Maria and bad Maria is so easily identifiable, and just in the way she moves, like it's so incredible. Language. You guys have thoughts on the acting? Because she looks like she's having so much fun as evil Maria. She's. It just
felt like there's.
Yeah, go ahead.
So what? Oh, okay.
Oh, so manic. I was gonna say.
That's the perfect word, because I just felt like every single moment that she had, she was like putting her whole energy into it. Like it's very carefully thought out. Even just like the look in her face, like having like one eye open, like she was just shifty eyes, like you just immediately you can always tell the difference. The only time
the way she would hold her shoulders and her hands, like the one time you had trouble was when?
But it made sense was when it was real Maria being accused, like, they were like, there's the witch, and she was like, oh god, they're gonna kill me, and she like starts shifting around and she like starts running away, and I was like, wait, hold on, which Maria is this? And then you see them like switch back. But I feel like I would also be kind of manic if someone was chased, like an angry mob was gonna like burn me at the stake. So
on kind of a sillier note, good Maria is really bad at running away. Like she zigzags everywhere she goes and like throws herself into the walls. Like, like it's really
She's a damsel in distress.
But she's also really fast. Like she outruns that mob really well. I guess the
Yeah.
adrenaline or something, but but for doing a bunch of zigzags, she also manages to outrun like 1,000 people. So I was felt like it was impressive.
There would be no stopping me if,
There
if
would be no
the
stopping
adrenaline
me.
would kick in. So it makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I was
Although
really
I did
stressed out
wonder-
during those scenes too. Of just like this movie gets really tense near the end.
Yeah. I was
Her
wondering,
dancing was impressive.
Her dancing.
Yes.
Her dancing was very impressive. Her dancing was like I wasn't expecting her to be able to move her body that way, but then
Those
I'm
hip
seeing it, I was like,
moves.
oh wow,
Yeah.
that's a belly. I mean, I don't know if that's belly dancing or something, but the hip moves were like you are trained in dancing, like you're not just an actress and so like these people were like highly talented. They could
This
do
was her
so many
film
things.
debut, also.
Really?
Wow.
So she must have a theater background. Like Fritz Lang had found her or had auditioned her for another film and then wound up casting her later for this film. But this was her screen debut.
She died in the 90s. She died in 92 or something like that.
Wow.
So she survived this film and a lot of other stuff.
Yeah. But apparently also the suit. So she's the one who is inside the automaton suit whenever we see it move. They didn't use like anyone else. But apparently the suit would like sort of cut into her and like she got a lot of bruising from it, and like she really hated doing the suit, but like Fritz Lang was adamant that she be the one to do it. Like again, he was just kind of terrible to this poor woman.
And to everybody,
to
apparently.
everybody, yeah, to pretty much to everybody. But it seems like she got kind of the brunt of it. She wasn't the only one of the cast. Like the Gustav Froelich, who plays Frederer, also had some horror stories about like the number of times that they would have to do takes. And he said there was one where he like has to fall at Maria's feet, and they did the shot for like 3 consecutive days of shooting. And he said at the end of it, he could like barely walk. Like he, like he had this moment where he couldn't even walk. So yeah, no, Bridget wasn't alone in her torture. I suppose they found solidarity in the fact that we're all suffering under this maniac. It's this thing where like you can't help but laud the film for how well it's made, but then when you hear about how it was made, it was like, is it worth it? You know, it brings up these kind of moral quandaries. You know, Jose and I went to film school together, and I feel like we were kind of taught not to this extent, but there was an element of the director does what needs to be done to get what they need on camera. And I've really kind of leaned away from that the older I get, where I don't feel like it's necessary. I feel like you can get good performance and you can get magic without tricking or torturing your cast, which is something that a lot of older directors did. You know, Alfred Hitchcock was known to be very manipulative to his actors and actresses.
Makes me, especially actresses, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, especially actresses. Like what's her name on The Birds? Is that Janet Leigh?
I don't.
Yeah. There's like horror stories from
throwing birds at her.
Yeah, exactly. Where he's like literally chucking birds at her off screen, and like the terror is like real. So, but I've kind of gone against that because I feel like if you work closely with actors and if you cast the right people, you don't need to do that. Like, if you need to do that, I feel like just, you know, maybe you need to reflect about your technique. That's my personal thought. I don't know if Jose, if you have different feelings or you know, somewhere between.
Like,
after I
like
put it
even
all
if
out.
even if I do, would I say it on camera? Right. Like even if I agree with the sentence of you do what you need to do, do I want?
I'm just
to say
wondering
this
if you know, is there just a line that you can cross, or is it something that you should avoid altogether? you know, because like back in the day, it felt like there were no lines and they were just like, you know, do what, like anything goes. And like the further and further we get in time, the more, you know, the closer those lines get to you, and it's easier to cross, you know, it's easier to cross lines because we know how, because we're just more aware of kind of respecting other people, I think, and treating other people like people.
I feel like I often have moments where I'm like, okay, we're done. We're not going to do it again. And the actor will be like, wait, hold on. No, let's do it again. Like, I overly am like cautious of it. But I feel like, you know, because I feel like actors are so willing to do whatever to just to get the role, which makes it even more problematic. But I think even if you had to like say like, oh, you got to do what you got to do, it's all about consent and like communication. You should never like manipulate someone, like tricking or like any sort of psychological, you know, torment. Like I think that's what makes Alfred Hitchcock like a terrible person, I think, for doing that. That's like, there's the difference between being a good director when you work with people and then just completely using people like objects, like cattle. Like
Yeah,
he says.
I think it's about communication because it's like a lot of actors are not only willing but want to push themselves to
right.
extremes, right?
Yeah.
You know, you get the on the very extreme side, you get like your Jared Leto's, right? Who like, you know, his like whole thing is that he just wants to be fully not himself, right? Like, and like is willing to do whatever you would ask him to do. Or like the Christian Bales, who's like, yeah, I'll lose 200 pounds. I don't care. You know, I'll almost die for the machinist. You know, that's fine. You know, you get these actors who are like very willing. So I feel like if you've got someone who's unwilling, like, and this is maybe dangerous water, but like, there's always somebody who's willing. Like, there's some masochist out there who wants you to torture them. And you know, but I agree with you that there is sort of a consent issue that needs to be addressed through open communication, and that like, you know, you need to kind of you need to establish those safe words. I feel like it's like if you are
safe words,
right? If you are going to have something where like, you know, you tell your actress that her mother has died to get her to cry, which is like I forget which film did this, but that's like a real story. Then I feel like you need to have something up front where they're aware that like you could be manipulating them, and that if it's too real, there needs to be a way for you to be like, okay, if this is real, you got to fucking tell me. Like, to kind of break that illusion, because you're dealing with humans and they will carry trauma with them, and trauma has a way of self-replicating and spreading into the future that like, I feel like more than just caring about the person in front of you when you traumatize somebody, you also have to think about what the consequence of their trauma will be on others, because it's a ripple effect. And I think that this is where, you know, a lot of older directors kind of lose sight. You know, it's like, okay, I'm doing something to the actress. She agreed to be an actress, right? She knew what she was signing up for. We all know how this industry works. But then when she goes crazy and she's like crazy to the people around her, suddenly you spread that trauma like exponentially. And that's something I feel like was never considered. It's, I mean, you know, it's just like, I think a callous way of looking at humans and directing them.
It's like, this is a funny way to say this. It's kind of like the relationship between like landlords and tenants, where like, you know, you're trying to make money off of it, but like, you know, the tenant is actually surviving off of this. Like, you know, you don't know what they're willing to give up to pay whatever they need to like not be put out on the street. But then, you know, the landlord, it can be either very forgiving about that, or, you know, I've seen like posts on people who are landlords who are like, hey, my tenants, you know, everything was put in order. How can I keep the deposit anyway? Like, they will literally take advantage. So it's like,
Yeah.
anyway, sorry. That's just what that reminded
No,
me
that's an
of.
interesting parallel. Jose, you've been kind of quiet and a lot of times.
I've been listening.
Yeah, yeah.
I've been listening. I've been trying to practice that a little more.
I've seen you
it's
direct,
complicated.
and I've never seen you be an asshole to your
I don't think-
actors.
I don't
Maybe
think-
I just wasn't around at the right moment, but from my experience, I don't know if your view is that I would do anything it takes, but I've never seen you really cross any lines that you've always.
I've
been
had
very
my
open.
moments. I had my moments, most likely not with actors. I had my moments with other. I mean, I had a couple of stories, personal stories about things that happened on set that did push my boundaries outside of what you're used to know me for. But you know how my mind works. My mind works on like, I don't think this has an answer, because Kubrick, Fellini, Bergman, Hitchcock, we revere them, and then they were assholes, but we still revere them. We still go into film school and go like, I want to try to do what they did. Well, what they did was being assholes to people until they got what they wanted, and then we praise them for that. So then it's difficult to tell somebody that that's not the way when all their idols have been doing that for several years. I personally don't think that you should do something like that. But again, it's like Danielle said, like some actors will be like, no, I can do it again. I can do method acting. I can like really hurt me or really slap me. I mean, it's kind of a slippery slope. I don't think it should come from the director, but at the same time, it's like when you were saying about trauma, right? You're saying like, oh, you don't want to create trauma. You don't want your actors, your trauma. You want your performance to come into set with trauma, because that's where the performance is going to come. A person cannot avoid trauma during their life. So how could you be an actor if you're not pulling from real emotions and stuff like that? That involves trauma. You should not cause the trauma, but you do capitalize on the trauma of other people for performances. Like, that's just like every single actor that you talk to goes and says, when I do this scene, I'm thinking about the dog that got run over when I was 5 years old. Like, that's where they're pulling from. You can't fake these things. They just pull it out of real emotions. So hopefully, yes, your actors are going to come from trauma, but you're not going to let them go with more.
Right. No, and you're right that it is a complicated issue, and it is there is kind of some nuance there in terms of capitalizing on trauma. Because you're absolutely right. Good drama comes from traumatic experience.
Most comedians have terrible lives. that's what's like it's a consistency that is unbelievable. It's like that's exactly that. Like, comedy becomes the coping mechanism, and then they eventually find a way to capitalize on trauma. Like, this is empowering people to say like, look, take this and make it into something good.
I also think that, like, as humans and as civilization gets more knowledge, there is kind of a mantra that we need to have to do better. You know, It's like, yes, I can revere what horrible people have done, like the byproduct or the product of what they've done. But my goal is to make something equally great, but without a harsh human cost, like to do better, to do something, because we always want to innovate, right? We're always looking for something that's novel and new. And so, like, as creators, we want to create that. And so that means pushing boundaries, but you have to kind of choose where you want to push, right? And I feel like pushing boundaries in the direction of, things that would create trauma for your actors is not where I want to push boundaries. I want to push boundaries on the ideas on the page, right? Like, I have a lot of ideas for films that I could never produce because they would be wildly expensive, but the concepts are as far out as I can put them, right? That's where I'm trying to that's where I would like to innovate if it's at all possible. So, I think you kind of have to pick your battles, so to speak. And I would almost sacrifice performance for concept if I had to kind of choose. Ideally, you don't have to choose, but yeah, Danielle?
I feel like you can, ideally you wouldn't want to do this, but you could make someone's performance better through editing. Like, you can always,
and you do,
and through blocking.
Filmmakers do that all the time, right? And look at reality editing. That's entirely what it is. It's performance from editing, right? You get producers who try to coax them to say, good sound bites or whatever. But for the most part, it's all done in post. So I think that that's entirely acceptable. And that, like, even great actors are enhanced by editing. Like, there's no doubt about it, right?
I mean, think about this. Like, the job of a director is to help, is to create a vision and then to help an actor become what they need them to become. Because it's not a democracy. It's the director's vision. So if you're not a good communicator, and then you have to resource to trickery to get a performance, that's on you. That's the director's fault. Like, you need to take the blame if you get or didn't get a performance. It's not the actor's fault. It's the way that you're communicating, the techniques that you're using. Some of these people might just get frustrated and eventually just do what Kubrick and Fellini and all these people did. I don't think that that's supposed to be the way that you do it, but it's definitely a technique that has worked before, and then some people emulate it. At the end of the day, I mean, if you take this movie, for example, then this movie, as you're saying, is kind of an oxymoron of itself, because it's sending a message that at the same time is not being done during production. Right. But they're saying it, the mediator between the hand and the mind is the heart, right? So that they say it there. They say it.
So
they say it in the
production,
movie.
Who is that? Because the director's the head, right? The actors is the hand, right? The crew is the hands.
Director?
Who's the mediator, right?
The assistant director, maybe?
Yeah, I guess like your AD, also the producer, I suppose.
I don't think it's a person. I think it's a sensation.
Or is the producer the head?
The head.
Right? Yeah. And the director is supposed to be the mediator, right? I think that is kind of how it is, because the director is supposed to communicate like what is on the page to what is happening on production.
Right.
But
the mediator is the union representative.
You might be right there. Yeah, it's your oversight.
It's AOC. The mediator is AOC.
I mean,
she's the heart.
Yeah,
she is. No, she really is.
She's got some heart, right? Anyway. All right, I think we'll wrap it up now. This has been
a tangent there.
Yeah, I think it was a good one. Though.
That was a good tangent. I like that tangent.
Early because I was really enjoying the discussion. It's kind of what I was hoping for from this podcast, and I think I brought on the right people to join me on this adventure. Thank you guys so much, Jose Venuto. Wonderful as always to have you.
Thank you. I appreciate being here. I'm enjoying this series, and I'm looking forward to the next 7.
Yeah, absolutely. Danielle, also great to have you. Wonderful insight as always.
Always good to be here. I'm super excited to see, what is it, 7th Seal next?
Yeah, next will be 7th Seal. Do you want to put out any, like, where the people can find you type thing?
You can find me at Danielle Stories on Instagram.
Cool. And I've been your host, John Olson. You can find me at John in Paradox. There's no H anywhere in that. Next, as Danielle said, we're going to do 7th Seal. Bergman, as was referenced this episode. So we'll see, we'll see what torture his cast went through, and if it was worth it, or if it deserves a tip of the hat or a wag of the finger, as they say.
we should make, I mean, I'm going to just put this out there, but we should make a series of podcasts and then electing only films that are known for how they abuse their production. And then we make a series about films that did not have, films that were great and revered, but actually were very good in production, just to see the juxtaposition of these two things.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's hard to know when directors are good, because you always hear the horror stories.
To be fair with David Fincher, he does a lot of repetitive things, but it's so that he can have control over the performance in the edit.
Yeah.
But it's still not ethical to keep going for 50 takes. I don't know.
Yeah, 50 takes, it's crazy. Especially when you say things like, all right, just delete those first 20 takes. Right?
I mean, I don't know if you don't have.
There's a famous story about Jake Gyllenhaal being very disheartened to hear that exact phrase on Zodiac. Like, they'd been doing it over and over, and David Fincher's just like, just delete those takes. Like, just just chuck them out the window, and it's like, what have I been doing in my life?
It's a little complicated to think about Jack Nicholson without thinking here is Johnny, and then not realizing that was there because he did it 120 times.
Right. All right.
Anyway,
we'll cut off now and say thank you for watching. If you're on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you're listening to this on podcast, please subscribe so you can find out when future episodes will come in. Be sure to join our Facebook group. You can find it either by typing in Views in Paradox or its original title, The Movie Club Collective. We've been doing some fun film brackets, and we kind of post movie news and just general interaction there, and like post about coming episodes. So feel free to join that group. It's a fun space that is mostly apolitical, which is kind of a nice thing on the social medias. So until next time, watch good movies and, use your critical thinking skills.